Hi, good afternoon. This is video log entry 179. It's about 1:30 p.m. CST. Um, Today's been pretty slow. I went on a walk earlier today and I spent a lot of time thinking as usual, and um, I decided to give myself a treat, so I went to the grocery store and I got myself some food. Like those, those little heated pads, right? Or I forgot what they call them, like the little hot spots or whatever for buffets and whatnot. And I decided to get myself some chicken and mac and cheese and mashed potatoes, and it was not too bad. It was my first time actually doing that because every time I walk by it, I have like, I don't know why, but when I try new things in public, I get like just stupid anxiety. It tends to make me not enjoy the simplicities of life and all that. So, um, yeah, I don't know. I thought that was my first time doing that after going to that store for like a year or so. And I got myself a Mountain Dew. I don't know why I made it go the other way, but yeah. So this is my first time getting this Purple Thunder. So what is it, like raspberry and blueberry or something? And I haven't had a Mountain Dew in a long time, so I decided to try it out, and it was not too bad. It wasn't too bad. I don't know what else to say about it though, but it tastes good. It's just sugar mainly. um, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I just been trying to relax. I did some job applications as usual, and I was looking at retail stuff because why not? I guess, even though I kind of have it in like the same category as restaurants because I'm going to be in a building stuck and having to deal with customers and being around a lot of people. I didn't mention that last time. When I think of restaurants, I just think of they kind of like go into like the same category of my mind, so I don't separate those two and say restaurants and retail. But they're basically the same thing. It's service, right? It's a service industry. I should have just said that. Um, so I mean, yeah, I mean, I applied to a couple places because why not? And I think my manager called me for the same position that I applied to last summer. So I'm hoping that I could probably just start working early over there. If I can do that, then I can just not have to worry about looking for other positions that I wouldn't really care about, to be honest with you. And that was a relaxing job. It was just a lot of driving around and doing building maintenance and fixing things every once in a while and just cleaning up and just being outside. And I'm fine with that. Having to drive throughout the city was fun. And the only thing I didn't really like doing was parallel parking because I never had to, and I didn't have that for my driving test. And I also lived in the suburbs for so long, so there was no reason to parallel park. So for the most part, there were some places, but yeah, and I never had a reason to do it. So yeah. Anyways, so I mean, generally it was a decent job. The people were okay for the most part. Yeah, you had your psychos here and there, and it was fun. It was fun. The only thing is that, well, I don't feel like having to be specific about the job, but it was just, summer days were just busy and a lot of people on the beach and whatnot. And of course, you get a lot of people from the west suburbs and people who are further away from the city that want to enjoy the lake, right? So you had a lot of people over there, and it's relatively okay. I want to try something different. But if I could get myself through there early and then transition to something else, if I change my mind, then I can always do that, obviously. So I'll have to talk to my manager about that to see if I can, just come in early and, I guess prep the facilities for the season coming up. So, yeah. Um, Aside from that, I mean, like, I always think about, like, just random thoughts about things that most people usually don't think about. I don't think. I mean, okay, maybe not. I don't know. Like, it's just random thoughts. And the thing is, when I go on walks, that's when my brain is naturally more active, and it's hard to keep track of all the thoughts that go through my head because it feels like my head's running a million miles per second. So it's just too much. And most of them, of course, I mean, when you think about a thought, they tend to be based off of emotion. That's like the quote unquote axiom that thoughts tend to emerge from is an emotional response to a stimuli, and then like a cascading of thoughts from it. It's like, the same thing when you think about, like I mentioned in the last video, right? When you think about pessimism, it's typically coming from a stimuli response that reminds you of something, or it's directly related to it. It could be one of the two, obviously, and it creates a cascading of pessimistic thoughts. Of course, there's silver lining for every pessimistic thought, right? You know, you could think of something positive about even the worst thing in the world. Like I don't know, like you know, it's like you could think about things that are from like associated to other, and then you could say, well, at least that's not me. And then if it's happening to you, say at least other people aren't, you know, dealing with this bullshit. So good for them. That's like, and then also like you could think of like, just like I'm just thinking about like the most extreme example of like, you know, I don't know what I would consider to be the most extreme example would be eternal suffering in hell potentially. um, just extremely negative. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know, something like that. So I mean, like even if you go down to that realm of a negative stimuli that creates, I mean that then again you wouldn't even have the necessary response, like actual pessimistic thought, because your brain is being overloaded with pain. So that wouldn't necessarily happen. But I don't know why I felt like having to go to the most extreme. Just to cover all bases. I usually go to the extremes to cover all the bases for the most part, and everything in between gets filled in. Instead of having to go over like a linear set of contrived examples, I'm lazy with examples most of the time, and it just seems like to be a waste of brain power, because abstract thoughts tend to be easier to convey instead of having to give contrived examples to explain those abstract thoughts. That's just how my brain is, because it's just less compute, right? Which is why I would be a horrible teacher. So I was thinking about like pessimistic thoughts and like, you know, stimuli and how, you know, what I say in the last video about, I don't know, I'm thinking about these things because I like solving problems, and, you know, my problem tends to be my own pessimistic thoughts, and I talk about, you know, the channels or stimuli that can be seen as channels, and these, I think of channels as like thought channels, that arrive from these stimuli that induce these thought channels and whatnot. And, you know, of course you would want to maximize the stimuli involved with that, but then there are also two kinds of stimuli: the stimuli that you can control and the stimuli that you can't. So, and of course it doesn't really matter with optimistic thoughts typically, usually, and then like you also have to be careful, because there's another form of optimistic thoughts, right? You know, it's like there could be like a small time frame in which, you know, you get overload of optimistic thoughts to then kind of tunnel vision to then forget about like your the long term, right? And then that could create a cascading of pessimistic thoughts that occur from you tunnel visioning and whatnot. But again, that's just seen as like, you know, of course, like playing a video game, it creates a cascading of optimistic thoughts in the short term, but in the long term, it doesn't end out actually creating a positive net effect, and it creates a place in which where you could get potentially stuck or decrease optimized brain functioning, and also just you know, just ignoring things that you should be taking care of, right? And of course you have to properly deal with that it's obviously a balance like anything else, right? So those are like the differentiations that you should be concerned about, or the thoughts that tend to tunnel vision, and the thoughts that occur through just having microdoses of those, as opposed to, well, again, that's stimulus. That's just a form of stimulus abuse. So you'd have to be making sure that you're not doing stimulus abuse, because that's a form of tunnel visioning, which then creates a futuristic net negative, right? So yeah, you have to be careful with that kind of stuff. And also, like, another thing that creates pessimistic thoughts, aside from that, that the human mind tends to forget about, because it's, you know, we're short-sighted. Human beings are very short-sighted creatures. We tend to forget about the long term, for the most part. I mean, of course, some people are better at that. Yeah, I mean, like, of course, you'd probably think about, like, stagnancy, right? That's a huge generator of pessimism, because stagnancy creates more time in your head, meaning you tend to see things about the world and that you can't control, right? So I don't know, when I'm in stagnancy, I always think about things that I can't control, or I think about things that I can control, and I just end up not doing it, and then that creates a negative feedback loop. So that's usually the biggest thing for me. So I mean, obviously people talk about like idleness being the devil's playground and whatnot, so you have to be careful with that too. And of course you could turn all of this into an equation like anything else, and of course anybody would, of course you need some pessimism, right? Because if you have too many optimistic thoughts, and actually, you know, I don't know. At least my pessimism tends to be pretty extreme, but that's probably due to the fact that my brain has more trouble dealing with emotions, because I think that's naturally a blind spot of mine in comparison to the standard person. I'd like to say that I have emotional intelligence, but I think I could be blindsiding it by saying that I'm intellectualizing everything, so my emotional intelligence is as amazing as I think it is. But the reason why I've gotten better is because I spend a lot of time in my head and by myself, so I have a lot of time to process my emotions. And yeah. So where was I going with that? I forgot what I was doing with that. Anyways, I was talking about stagnancy and all that, and I was thinking about like the generators of pessimism and whatnot, and that's the biggest one. Well, it actually just creates an environment in which you start generating more pessimism, even if your external environment is quote unquote good, and then that induces a feedback loop of stimulus abuse due to stagnancy, because you want to ignore those thoughts, right? And those thoughts occur from just thinking about the world too much, I guess, and thinking about deeper things as opposed to the physical world that we live in, and focusing on like a problem or moving somewhere in the world and having goals and being goal oriented. So obviously you should just, anybody that, especially if you have a mind like mine, it's best just to keep moving forward, even though you may not know necessarily where you're going and whatnot. And yeah, I used to get into these really bad cycles of overthinking and going into stagnancy due to the fact that I procrastinate making a decision, to the point where my stagnancy actually created a slew of pessimistic thoughts, which then manifests as depression. And I think that's mainly just due to my own stupidity and short-sightedness, for creating those instances in which I got depressed, because most of the time when I was in states in which I was very passionate about intellectual pursuits, mainly intellectual pursuits, I was a happy person. And then when I started focusing on less abstract things like the world that we live in, then I typically just got bored of it, and then I got into states of stagnancy, and then that obviously creates a negative feedback loop in which pessimism overrides my mind and creates depressive states. So yeah, for me, I think it's just best for me to, be interested in intellectual pursuits, just due to the fact that that's how my brain works. It likes ideas a lot and abstractions. So yeah, I don't, and of course, pessimism is naturally an emotional response, but when I am analytical, where there's no emotion involved, like mathematics and whatnot, there's no pessimism because it's all objective. So I distract myself with objective endeavors pertaining to the realm of ideas, usually. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just letting my head go, and of course, again, there was another thing, is like pessimism obviously isn't a bad thing all the time, because pessimism has a right to be there. Emotions are a form of truth as well. So these pessimistic thoughts could occur from a stimuli that can be changed and whatnot. Again, I'm talking about things that can be changed and can't be changed, and I tend to separate those things, right? So pessimism does, you can't obviously, the only pessimism that you should be looking the silver lining at, and not ignoring, but knowing that you can't really fix, are the ones that are produced by stimuli that can't be fixed, right? And then of course you can do the best you can to deal with the stimuli that you can fix, and then of course you have to think about your head and how you're thinking of it. So I mean, you can also look at it like that too, because it's not just the stimuli, it's the brain that's processing the stimuli too. And for the most part, I've done both. I've worked on my brain through cognitive behavioral therapy, and most of the time it works out pretty well, and I have to challenge my thoughts as well, right? The pessimism may not necessarily be an accurate perspective of that particular stimuli. It may not, and I wouldn't even say accurate, it's just a good perspective, a productive perspective of that particular stimuli. Obviously, right? Especially if it's something you can't control. Yeah. So it's you know, these are interesting topics and whatnot, and I just spend a lot of time analyzing my thoughts. But yeah. Uh, but I mean, I think it's just best to, again, like I said, I think it's typically easier just messing with a stimuli as opposed to your own brain, because your brain is particularly, I mean, it's neuroplastic, but it's easier to fix the things outside of yourself that are fixable, as opposed to quote unquote fixing your brain, because the brain can be hard. If it takes a long time to create different thoughts from a particular stimuli, because it goes through a lot of it takes a lot of repetition, whereas fixing it obviously may not take a lot of repetition depending on how long it takes and whatnot. Of course, it depends on how long it and how much work it takes to fix it, but of course, you know, it varies from situation to situation. But I think from my experience, it's better just to fix the thing, as long as your thoughts are valid. And emotions, I think I think emotions are subjective, but you know, some emotions are more valid than other emotions, in my opinion. um, yeah, I didn't write anything down about this. I'm just letting my stream of consciousness go through, and then I'll probably look at this and say, what was I saying? And it's gonna sound weird. But yeah, that's why I usually I guess sometimes I let my stream of consciousness go, and then sometimes I go in my notebook and then I create an objective framework out of it, out of that particular thought or set of thoughts that create maybe a potential conclusion to it. And my first conclusion was just maximizing channels to create optimistic thoughts and minimizing the other channels that create pessimistic thoughts. Although it's a lot more complicated, that I just don't feel like going into every single nuance, because that could take a long time, and that could actually just be its own thing. And you could probably have a podcast about it for some person out there that is actually a professional when it comes to psychology and the human mind. And I guess there's one other tidbit with, you know, if you want to think about your life from it being a set of days and how you want to live your life through setting intention throughout each day. I think the best way to, I don't know, like I've heard from somebody that, you know, it's good to set a particular note for your day. I guess you could call it a note, to make yourself feel good, and then to end it with a good note too. And for me, typically, especially now, I'm just focused at looking at jobs, and it's good to feel like you're being productive somewhere, even though you may not know exactly where you're going. So that's what I do every day to make myself more optimistic. So I do that, and it works. It works pretty well. I mean, it makes me more neutral than optimistic, but you know, I'm a fairly neutral person in most situations, because I think I'm just too logical. I don't know. I don't invalidate emotions. Most of the time, I think emotions are annoying to deal with, but I still process them because I know I have to, because those things just have to be dealt with, so I won't revert back to my old ways of being, which was stimuli abuse. Yeah, so I have to be healthier. And you know, I really don't think I need medication. I always think about that. I was like, I really don't think I need medication. Like, it's just I have to be more mindful about my thoughts, and I had to create a nice rigid structure that actually I just had to be more mindful about my emotions. It's hard for me to do so, and yes, medication can help just due to my susceptibility to blindsiding myself when it comes to my emotions, but I'd prefer to practice observing my emotions more instead of going into them and letting them take control of me and my life. So yeah, and that's a good way. I mean, what I just mentioned is a good way for the most part, and I think I kind of covered most of the bases with that. And I just spent like 18 minutes talking about pessimism and optimism and how they can emerge from stimuli and potentially changing the mind. But yeah, and I'm probably going to forget most of that unless I write it down and then create a conclusion out of those thoughts, which I may do just out of curiosity, because why not? Yeah. School's gonna be fun. I have a lot of others. I've been procrastinating on my tests, but I've been taking it easy. I think I may just check out for today, and then just go back to doing what I was doing. I may do a few more jobs today, and then I'll go back to doing my more adulting stuff. I have a few phone calls to make, a few things pertaining to my phone, and that's pretty much it. I don't know. I don't have a lot. It's pretty laxed over here. So yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I wonder what other people think about this subject of when it comes to negative and positive emotions and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking, as usual. Bye.